Hello, everybody. We'll wait a few seconds or so to make sure everybody can connect their audio and any visuals. Hi there. While we have you all joining in, first we want to welcome you to the webinar today in partnership with the Educating All Learners Alliance and American Institutes for Research. Today we're excited to talk about how COVID-19 affected education, to provide some research from AIR's national survey, particular to social and emotional learning supports. And so we would love at first to hear from you. I'm going to drop a poll on your screen now, and we are curious to hear from each of you. What is your role at your organization? So are you a teacher or educator yourself? Are you a school admin? Are you an educational stakeholder working at a nonprofit or any similar organization or something other? And if you're other and willing to write in the chat what that other is, please feel free to let us know. We want to make sure that what we share today serves you as our audience and just provides some helpful perspective. I'm seeing some other, which is interesting. So thank you all. Feel free to continue adding your answers there. Just a few quick logistics points before we get into it. As you'll see, we are recording our webinar for today. So this will be made available on the Educating All Learners Alliance YouTube page shortly after we complete today's session. So you'll be able to reference and share it. But we also will be sharing the slideshow from today, so you can click through to any of the links that we mentioned that you're not able to, you're not able to click through in the chat box. And then lastly, you're welcome to ask any questions that you may have at any point in the chat, and we'll have dedicated time towards the end to answer all of those. So I will go ahead and get started. So for today, we wanted to introduce you to our speakers. We have Matthew Vinson, who's a senior researcher at AIR. We have Fausto Lopez, who's a senior technical assistant consultant, also with AIR. And then we have Monique Fletcher, who's joining us as a principal with M. Fletcher and Associates. In terms of our agenda, you'll see it here. We'll be going through a few different points, including findings from our research and how you can apply it and share it with your various stakeholders, in addition to that Q&A that I mentioned. And so briefly, if I didn't say already, my name's Gabrielle Oates. I'm here in partnership with AIR representing the Educating All Learners Alliance, or ELA as we like to call it. And so ELA was created in response to COVID-19, but has continued to be an effort that we hope serves educators and students even past COVID-19. But essentially, we wanted to ensure the continuity of special education services during virtual and hybrid learning. So we have a resource library where we continue to add new resources to promote best practices in the field. We have over 70 partner organizations and growing. One of those partners is AIR, and we provide resources such as webinars like this, podcast episodes to serve the needs of students with disabilities. On your screen here are a few of the logos of the founding partners of the Educating All Learners Alliance. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our AIR team, but we did want to add just another poll, again, to frame some of our information today. And so we would love to hear from you which community your school or organization, if you're not at a school, represents. This will help us to, again, provide you with the best information. And we see there's a lot of people who aren't working in schools directly. So we would love, again, to hear what community you represent, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Matthew.
Great. Well, thanks, Gabrielle. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Again, my name is Matthew Vinson, and I'm a senior researcher here at the American Institutes for Research. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about a survey that we conducted last year, as you probably already know. But first, I wanted to talk about what drove AIR to create this survey and what the survey really meant to accomplish. So give you that high level perspective, and then we'll dive into the data. So AIR, as you can see on your screen, AIR's mission is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better and more equitable world. And I really want to underscore that last part in particular, because the survey we're going to be talking about today was driven by and funded by the AIR Equity Initiative, which is basically an endowment that AIR has. So we funded this survey ourselves. And we did that because we thought that this is going to be a really important conversation. It's a very important topic. We knew this back when, of course, the pandemic first started, back in about March of 2020. And so to really get this moving quickly, they directly funded it. And within just about a couple of months, we went from school closures and the like to administering this survey. So very, very fast, at least within the realm of survey administration, certainly of this size. But that's what's driving the survey overall. The general purpose of the survey was to find out from districts and charter management organizations what they're doing to adapt to the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So of course, we all knew that this was going to be a massive challenge, closing different schools. We wanted to find out, well, what are people doing and how does that vary across the country? We're going to be talking a little bit more about that, specifically one set of data from the survey. So to get into some specifics, we sampled about 2,500 districts from across the country, a nationally representative sample, and 260 charter management organizations. The timing here is important to stress. The survey was first launched May 20th of 2020. So again, pretty quickly after closures first started. And we collected data between May 20th and about September 2nd. So keep that time period in mind as you're thinking through what I'm showing you and what these data mean. Undoubtedly, things have changed. And we can guess that the needs have increased and how different districts have responded, hopefully have changed as well. But we don't know exactly how. So just keep that in mind. That's a limitation of the data. They are time bound, and that's important to note. We are collecting another survey right now, just thought I'd mention that. And we are thinking about maybe a third. We'll see how that pans out, but that's the plan. In terms of overall response rate, about 30% responded to the survey, which for a survey of this size is pretty decent. So 753 districts, 91 charter management organizations. So the data that I'm going to be talking about today are based on that particular sample. And I think what should come up on your link, or on your screen there's a link that will take you to more information about this. I'll refer back to that here in a minute. So topics, I just wanted to briefly give you a sense of what this survey covered, because it was a big survey. And I think this underscores how 30% is actually not so bad. Actually, it was pretty good. So timing of school closures due to COVID-19, distance learning approaches and challenges, support for students with disabilities and English learners, district policies and requirements, such as grading and graduation, staffing and human resources, and then health, well-being, and safety. So these were the different areas that we wanted to ask districts about. Each one of these generally had multiple questions. Some of those questions had multiple items within them. So this was a pretty big survey, a pretty big undertaking. So if you do want to find out more about these different areas, definitely check out that link. There's more information about AIR, more information about the survey, how it was done. And of course, you have access to the brief. There are other briefs available, and there will be more forthcoming. So check back. We'll be continuing to push information as we finish analyses and are able to get this information out to all of you. So with all that said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that last item, or that last section rather, district social and emotional supports for students during COVID-19. So that's our topic for today. So it's only one little part of the survey that's important to emphasize. Specifically though, I wanted to highlight where the data come from. And so at the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see question 35, and you'll see several different items within that surrounded by a blue box. And so all the data that we're going to be looking at today come from this particular question, or rather this set of 4 different questions. So it's important to really have that language in front of you so you can see exactly what the respondents saw when they were taking the survey. So question 35 reads, does your district or organization have any of the following resources available to support the health and well-being of students while schools are closed due to COVID-19? And the 4 different items we have here are staff trained in trauma-informed care are available to students and families. School counselors or similar school staff provide mental health counseling sessions with students. Staff trained in social emotional supports are available to students. And finally, staff trained in safety and well-being are monitoring the status of students and families. So just note the language there. So when we talk about, say, social emotional supports, it's important to recognize that that language is very open. We didn't tell people how they should define that or what really falls under that category. They could take that definition and basically, or they take that term rather, and just apply the definition that they think fits. So that's the language that the respondents saw. The options that they had for responding were, as you can see them here, they could say, no, we didn't have any of those kinds of supports available. We just didn't have them. Or they could say yes, but only for some families who need it. So you can see that response there. And then yes for all families who need it. So those were the 3 different options. For purposes of what we're going to be looking at today across the next few slides, we took the no response and the yes for some, and we combined them together. And we compared them to the yes for all. Basically try to create that dichotomy, heighten the difference there, and make the results a little simpler to actually read. So that's what we've done. That's what you'll see here in a second. Okay. Now, I doubt that this is going to be terribly surprising to anyone. We started off with a theory that it's going to be more likely to be the case that high poverty districts are going to say either no or we provided them for some families, but not all, when you compare that to, say, low poverty districts. We thought there would be a difference there. And so we defined high versus low poverty as looking at basically the child poverty rates within the districts that were in question. And we defined high poverty as having 20% or over, and low poverty as having 10% or less. So creating that kind of gap to, again, heighten the difference to see if there's something that's really going on here. And as you can see from this slide, it looks like there is. You can see that the high poverty group of districts, and you can see the numbers down below the chart. And again, you have access to the brief. You can download that and review it at your leisure. But it shows you that this is a subsample of what we're looking at, but it's a sizable one. But here you can see that there is a difference between high poverty and low poverty. I do want to point out that it's only the first comparison here between high and low, looking at that first set of columns, staff trained in social emotional supports. That comparison was statistically significant. And what that means is that we generally think that this is not due to chance. This is a real finding within the data. The other comparisons, we didn't quite reach that level. It was close, but it didn't quite reach the level of statistical significance. So that's important to point out. I can talk a bit more about that if you really want to dig into some of the details. But that first column definitely was, and you can get a pretty good sense of why that might be when you look at the size of the differences here. That first column has a bigger gap. So it makes sense. You'd have more confidence in saying that's a real difference, and it's not just due to chance. So that's important to stress. I'll come back to that in the next 2 slides as well. But overall, the pattern of the data really supported what we had theorized, and I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anybody. Okay. We also looked at district size and said, well, we think that there's probably a good chance that smaller districts aren't going to be able to provide these kinds of supports, and notably the staff trained in these areas, the same way that larger districts might be able to. And as you can see from the data, that again was supported in the data. Each of these comparisons was statistically significant. So here you have a very clear pattern where smaller districts are more likely to say no or yes, but only for some families, as opposed to yes for all families when you compare the small versus the large. And the small, in this case, we're talking about districts with 1,000 students or less than that, and large would be 10,000 or more. So again, creating that gap to try and heighten the contrast to get a better sense of what's going on. Okay, The last set of comparisons here that I wanted to show you has to do with Locale. And again, I doubt this is going to be hugely surprising, but we theorize that more rural districts are also going to have less access to some of these resources and are more likely to say no or yes for some versus yes for all. And indeed, that's what we saw. Interestingly, if you use urban as your kind of comparison group in this case, both rural and town worked very similarly here. You can see that in the data, where they're very close to each other, as opposed to suburban, which was not statistically significant from urban. And those bars are pretty close to each other. And in this case, the first three comparisons were statistically significant. That last one wasn't, but again, it was pretty close. But you can see a pretty clear pattern there that supported what we had theorized, that yes, rural and town-based districts generally are more likely to say no or yes for some, as opposed to yes for all when you compare them against urban districts. Okay. So that basically is what the brief shows. It's what it explains. The summary here is higher poverty, smaller or more rural districts are less likely to report having staff trained in these supports available for all families who needed them. And I don't think that's going to be earth-shattering to anybody. So what is the point here? The basic point, why we wanted this to get out there into the field, is that I think it helps to have real numbers to look at. It's one thing to have a basic theory and say, yeah, we expect this to be the case. It's another thing to be able to point to some numbers and say, here's what the gap looks like. And I think it's useful in that respect to start conversations. And just like we're doing today, and really start thinking, what does this mean? And to move beyond just what the data show, to talk about things that the data can't really tell by themselves, which is, why is this the case? And what do we do about it? Another important question is it still the case? Again, reminding you that these data come from the middle of last year. How have the data changed? I'm sure that they have. And again, the need has probably gotten greater, even as districts have, I'm sure, done what they could to respond to it. So what does that look like? So these are important questions that are raised by the data. And hopefully the data support that conversation and can really push us in the direction of talking about supports. So along those lines, I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Fausto, who's going to talk a bit more about the importance of social emotional supports, especially during COVID-19, and how those kinds of support might be provided or built. So Fausto, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Before I lose you, just want to make sure, okay, perfect. Welcome everyone. Again, something the data definitely does, again, provide us a place to think back about where we have come and all the different types of adjustments that have had to happen along the way as we really look to, again, provide support to all of the young people and the communities that we engage in, again, making sure that young people are provided the proper setting, conditions for achievement, for positive development. And again, we tend to talk about this because the data is spread around and because we know at the end of the day, across the demographic, across the settings, young people are being challenged and have been challenged throughout the process. And it really has put us as the adults, as the systems builders, as the leadership to really figure out how is it that we're going to reach the most young people. And again, this was perplexing when we were in person, but obviously adjusting to the COVID construct, the universal trauma, as we call it, to again provide context that everyone is going through thing and really emphasize that the supporting the whole child, even I would say the whole community, is more critical than ever, because that's really the lever that we're going to push. Because again, it was hard to coordinate these systems of support when we were down the hall from our providers, down the hall from the teacher, knew which door to knock on, knew which phone call to make. But again, this remote hybrid way of connecting and making sure that all of our systems don't lag, that they continue the critical systems of support that they were doing prior, continue and flow through as we think about reentry and think about all the different contexts around learning with our young people. So we know our young people, the data shows uncertainty. being faced, different adult and staff capacity to respond to these critical moments. We're going to talk about what that looks like. But what we do know is there's a lot of opportunity, because we do know that those data come from, again, spring of 2019, almost a whole year ago, in the way of like how we responded. But we know that we're still responding. We always need to be proactive and really make sure, again, what we've been seeing around, again, a different scan of school reopening guidance, which was very promising, and again, put us all in an action-oriented place to react to those data, or even the reality of what we saw when we were put into a pivoting mindset around the pandemic, was really that, again, there's an opportunity to double down on existing initiatives. So much work was being put into place to really meet the whole child, again, the intersection of both academic, social, emotional, behavioral development and support that we know was happening before. And so we know, again, across different states, there were already initiatives happening around, again, the development of standards, implementation of just, again, comprehensive support around the intersection of whole child initiatives. And so again, right now we're seeing that we need to really make sure that we are thinking about alignment, thinking about pushing those forward, and again, even doubling down on our investment, because we have seen that relationships, safety, immediate needs of young people and communities have bubbled up here. So at times it's really making sure that we are, again, embracing pivots and understanding how we can provide the most, again, responsive support for our young people. And some of that will be, what were we doing before? And we're going to talk about even, again, community schooling and different other partnerships that involve that. Consider the well-being of the school community. I think this is critical as we talk about the universal trauma. Again, this is happening to our young people, but it's also happening to the adults, and obviously within the school community, the staff, the principals, those who are developing all the different plans and are looking to be responsive to all the different needs. It's maddening, and it won't just magically happen to consider the well-being of all that. So again, it's going to take a system of support. It's going to take a coordinated, aligned effort, again, building on hopefully those systems that existed before and all of the sweat and toil that was happening at that time to make sure that we could do that. And again, it's more about the critical nature of the now, to make sure that we're really souping up our systems to make sure that, again, we're meeting the needs of as many young people, I would say all young people, which really pushes us to leverage our partnerships. And again, we're going to have an opportunity to really break down expanded learning partnerships. Again, there's so many different types of partnerships out in our communities that we know. And again, this is just an opportunity to make sure that we leave no stone unturned, again, in our effort to, again, respond to the various needs that our young people and the staff will need to get them to the capacity to be supportive to our young people, not only today, but obviously moving forward. Okay, so let's just talk about how SEL, social emotional learning, fits in. Again, our friends from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, have really been promoting this idea that it is an ingredient. It provides, again, a primer, an opportunity to explore, express emotions, again, at the youth level, and even for us as adults. And it really is a critical, more and more, a critical lever of equity within education or across learning, understanding that all young people need the process of social emotional learning, not just some young people, right? So let's just talk about what that looks like, again, when we try to broaden that and broadcast engaging young people in the process of social emotional learning more intentionally, at a higher quality, at a higher level, pushing ourselves to see those SEL practices so that we can promote the process of this learning, which does not just happen in one time snap. It is a continuum of learning. It is something that, again, at 41 years old, I am still crystallizing. We are all crystallizing, and we need to embrace that, build the capacity of the adults, of staff, to understand that, again, this process is going to look different, and the competency and the road to crystallizing those competencies in our young people will look different depending on what they're going through in their current and past situations. So again, we bring back, again, the intersection of trauma, well-being, mental health, and how social emotional learning is a way of leveraging some of that critical information on our young people, but it is by no means the only way, and is definitely at times not going to be something that will allow us to just say, well, if we do SEL, we'll solve the whole situation. At the end of the day, that is not as the way that SEL research has been broadcasted or kind of bubbled up, because at the end of the day, what it needs is a system of support. It takes kind of important considerations to think that your SEL is coming into a high quality, is aligned, and so that your logic model of your SEL implementation actually gives you the fruit to your labor of your implementation. So what does that look like? Huge considerations here. Whole child efforts take, again, leveraging what you already had. So that puts us in a place of what did we have? What are we not using? Again, in a constant system, diagnostic and reflection to, again, continuously improve and meet the needs, the diverse needs of our young people across mental health, trauma, school climate, SEL as a vehicle, depending on how you're implementing it. It will take, again, a tiered system of support, because, again, we know that the intersection of the work that we do here will require, again, community members, external partners, internal expertise, building the internal expertise of our staff, which is, again, an ongoing process. So more and more, as we pay attention to this idea of, again, the well-being of our school community, we need to make sure that we're giving time to check in about how our systems are working, how they're not working, how many young people we're doing. And that is driven by data. So again, the data above from these type of reports or ongoing data collection efforts that really allow us to see or get insights on what's happening in our communities allows us to work smart, not hard, so that we're not just throwing ideas into the wind. We are coordinated, we are strategic, and we are bringing in, right, everybody. But we have to take care of everybody as we do that, because this universal trauma, like as I've said, is impacting everyone, and we have to consider that as, again, implementation is dependent on the adult to make sure that they are modeling this work, that they are living this work, that they are making sure that they're really being critical of their developmental relationships within their systems of support, and that will live at every adult level, not just a teacher, not just a school coordinator. It takes everyone to do this for young people. Now, our partners in expanded learning are, again, we have always been at the forefront of social and emotional support, development, enrichment. And so, again, this is always an opportunity to make sure that as we just talk, we don't talk about partnerships, that we also re-emphasize the partnerships, again, that we had before. The investments and initiatives that we had before when we were all working potentially in the same space. We need to make sure that we take advantage of the expertise in our after school, expanded learning, out of school time, external community providers, and the work that they have. And we have a lot of great guidance that can help you think about that landscape, remind us of the great things that we were doing before when we were all down the street from each other and kind of reaching out, again, understanding that this is a critical lever. And Monique is going to really unpack this in her next section. So one promising model, again, when we talk about after school expanded learning, a lot of the guidance that is being bubbled up here is really reframing this enrichment hour, the snapshot of after school, which is not that simple anymore, right? When everything is after school, Karen Pittman said that, right? Where everything is now relevant. This idea that maybe, again, talking about them as learning hubs can really support this work. Really talking again about how all of this, the role of the ecology of learning supports just good outcomes for young people. And again, who plays a key role in these learning hubs? After school intermediaries or providers. Again, those community organizations that have reached to the young people that can give you those key insights on existing community efforts that help with alignment. And obviously district-led expanded learning initiatives that we know are making such strides prior to COVID. Again, this is about making sure that those enrichment, expanded learning opportunities do not stop. And again, there's so many great opportunities to do that, to impact those data that we saw from a year ago. And Monique is going to come in and really focus in on one of the strategies, which is, again, community school initiatives that really have been tested, researched to show these impacts around how to coordinate, how to further, how to continue that coordination. So Monique, I think you are coming in. I have reached my time. And just make sure that you are on camera before I hand it off.
Thank you. I really appreciate that setup. And I really appreciate your willingness to welcome in that lifelong learning and welcome in your age. I think is important. I'm a 43-year-old social worker who is still thinking deeply around trauma and still learning more about how trauma impacts me. And so how do we create these learning hubs where we're constantly reflecting and looking back and thinking critically about our practices? I am a lover of community schools. I have to be honest about that, but I think community schools welcome in all of that good expectation, knowledge, and potential partnership around growing some of these social emotional learning requirements, and how we create that system of care. Community schools really is those local partnerships, how you develop that system of care with community, meaning students, family, staff, CBOs, and how we promote well-being in the spaces that we're in. That opportunity to bring those inclusive supports, that building that stronger family, that stronger community, it really helps to bring the focus on well-being and partnerships and supporting that whole child. And I would even go further and say that whole community, as we think about schools as a learning hub, as an access point, as a place where we can give voice and perspective to the needs and interests of our communities at large. Community schools have several principles, but I want to enter in these three pivotal principles as we think about social emotional learning and as we think about trauma. The first community school standard, it isn't just one because it's here on the list, it's actually number one in our community school standards, is pursue equity. And with community schools, we firmly believe that educational excellence and equity are inseparable. They go together. And we want to really hone in and empower those typically who are disempowered or may have barriers to connection, to relationships, and to just education. We also want to invest in trusting relationships, as Brother Fausto mentioned earlier, that it takes time, it takes attention, it takes collaboration, it takes thought. We should think about all those formal social exchanges and also those informal social exchanges. And like was mentioned before, that some of those after school times, those extended day staff really have some of those real informal and formal relationships and exchanges with our community. And community schools feel like that is where we really fuel school transformation, is by those strong partnerships, that safe and nurturing space, being that respectful climate where people feel heard and respected, and we can all learn together. And then the third one I would welcome in is building on community strengths. How are we utilizing the strengths, the assets, the gifts and talents of all the people in the building, that in the community at large? How are we welcoming in those experiences to really ensure that we have an optimal space to learn and grow together? And how are we all thinking about how we're putting on our mask first as a provider before we think about supporting others? So I would welcome in this slide. I've been using this a lot as I talk about schools and talk about people. And this is I'm going to read you the SAMHSA definition of trauma as you take a good look at this slide. Trauma is an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on individuals functioning, their mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. I would offer you to think about the collective trauma we're all living through. COVID, the murdering of Black bodies that is on TV, the riot at the Capitol, the horrific winter storm that Texas experienced. We all witnessed and experienced those things, but we have experienced them at different depths. So I would call into this tornado that is in the picture. I'm from the Midwest and I know what tornadoes can do. But I also know that you can experience tornadoes differently if you live in a trailer versus a house on the hill versus a brick house. It all varies on how we experience those traumas, on those experiences as a community. Another thing I would offer us to welcome in is that trauma hurts and it lives in us. It's in our bodies. It's shaping us. It fills us with reflexive fear and anxiety and depression and shame. And it causes us to fly off the handle and do things that don't make any sense. I would welcome in the conversation or the deep thinking around the historical trauma that communities are experiencing before the pandemic. The structural racism, the poverty, the lack of jobs, the poor air and water quality that was in our soil before the pandemic. And so I would call in us to think deeply about how those things are passed on, how the intergenerational trauma is passed on for up to 16 generations. And those are things sometimes you cannot see, but are ever so present. I would also just enter in the idea that we are all experiencing trauma, and a harm does not have to become a trauma if it is processed, if we talk about it, if we come up with many different ways to communicate that and deal with that hurt. It can take a harm and keep it from becoming a trauma. I want to enter in some research around family and family engagement and cultural responsive education really is, I think, is the center of this. Funds of Knowledge reminds us that the discussion around race and class really does promote trust and encourages dialogue. And for those who don't know, Funds of Knowledge is kind of centered around teachers going out and doing home visits and welcoming in all those gifts and talents and assets and cultures from home into the school. And so as we think about COVID, as we think about living through traumas, as we think about going back fully in schools, we should really encourage that conversation around race, class, and to me, become linked is trauma. I do some work up in upstate New York that is a more rural space. And one of the things that I'm starting to become to realize is that one thing that is kind of across rural, suburban, urban spaces is the lack of trust and the effects of trauma. And so I would constantly think about how do we improve and really do some and execute some practices that really promote that trusting relationship. And so here are some mitigating practices that really just help to process some of these harms and potential traumas. And first thing we got to do is name it, acknowledge that racism exists and that it's impacting us in our communities. We have to understand how poverty and lack of resource is impacting all of us. Naming that and being honest about that is important. Working on your inner image, like how do you see yourself? How am I defining who I am? My daily practices of those rituals, those chants that we do that kids love and families love, those really are the practices that help to develop and grow those trusting relationships. How we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves present? Do we see ourselves on the walls in our schools? How do I see myself? And am I able to push that out in the world and share that in our schools, in our spaces, in our communities? Democratic process, clear, transparent democratic process also elevates trust. And the last couple of things I'd add is Indigenous practices. How are we using music, storytelling, conversation to welcome in a more deeper dive and a more deeper relationship? If I was to give this webinar an assessment, I would give it a F on developing trusting relationship because we cannot do conversation, and that's fine. But what's important is that we have to know and be very intentional about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we are welcoming in others. Last but not least, rest. Rest should be defined by the individual. How I rest, how you rest may all be different, but how are we welcoming in those ideas and those experiences, and even developing policies to support those things? Do we have mental health days? Do we make that a norm that we have to take time to rest so we're ready, not only physically, but emotionally? And then on the right is just some of the training topics we spent a lot of time on recently as we think through this as providers. We're thinking about race equity. I'm thinking, I've been talking a lot and teaching around LGBTQ health and well-being and how that it can be a traumatic experience. A partnership development, trauma-informed care. And then what's important is it's fine to be trauma-informed, but it's more important for us to be healing-centered. It's good to be able to recognize trauma, but if we continue to traumatize, we're not healing. And so I will also encourage us to think deeply about what we're doing to heal. And those experiential sessions, how are we practicing that? How are we modeling that? How are we taking time at the beginning to breathe and center ourselves as we go through this rapid change and ongoing grief and hurt and loss that many of us are experiencing. Before I close, I would love to offer 2 quotes that really speak to me a lot around this topic. And so I'll start with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said a student must learn to understand the motives of human beings, their illusions and sufferings, to acquire a proper relationship to others and to the community. And then last but not least, in response to and support of Black History Month, I'll welcome in Malcolm X. Malcolm X told us, we cannot teach what we don't know, and we cannot lead where we cannot go. So I encourage you to welcome those mitigating practices into your schools, into your communities, partnering with those community-based organizations, those extended learning providers to support you in that effort. And they can often be the bridge to heal all communities and all people as they do their work in creating and supporting well-being for all. So I'll pause there.
Wonderful. Hey, hi. Oh, perfect. I didn't. Again, there's just always opportunities again to unpack, and there's so many great resources. I think I wanted to leave with Gabrielle, don't this idea here that again, we have put some great resources in chat box. We obviously have even added some kind of prompting questions if anybody wants to. Yes, great. Thank you so much. We have some resources here real quick, just to kind of open it up, this idea here that there's a lot going on in being responsive to, again, whole child constructs, again, meeting young people where they are, being data driven so that we know how, promoting equity, including all of these partners to help us along the way. So you have a link there that really drives you to a comprehensive website that really has, again, very combed through national guidance and even tools that can help you as you contextualize, again, going beyond amplifying the work, reaching more young people, again, with these quality, critical services. So Gabrielle, I don't know if you have anything you want to add as we transition out?
Sure. Well, I believe our AIR team wanted to share about the upcoming research briefs here. So I'll pause if they wanted to join in. And again, I'll encourage you all, we're coming into some time that we have available for questions. So if you had a few, please feel free to add them in now. I'll also remind everybody that you will receive a copy of these slides, so you can click through. I'm sure you saw we have a lot of items linked and articles linked, so you'll have access to those. But yeah, I am seeing in the chat, as Fausto mentioned, there are some prompting questions. For example, we are curious to see what are key partners that have supported your COVID response. So let us know. And thank you for sharing that article on trauma-informed and healing-centered work and engagement for students.
Adult capacity, right, as we really look to do that, and that's why even something like that, from saying trauma-informed to healing centered, really pushes us again to always be at a place of learning and adapting, even if we were being intentional before, to again stay at the pulse of how we can keep changing our framing. Again, words have meaning, especially in this equity and culturally responsive space. So at times it's about checking ourselves and making sure that we keep that learning going. Sorry, Matt, I see.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I just wanted to highlight the briefs that were on I think the previous slide. I guess I can push that back just for a second. Just in case you wanted to take a look at these, I'm not going to say much about these at this point. Just wanted to remind you that there will be other briefs. There are some that are available now. So you can see there's a link right here. If you go to, I think the link's already in the chat, you can probably find it. But they're out there and more will be forthcoming. So hopefully you'll be able to see these results. They're all really short. They're just a few pages long. We tried to keep them very digestible, just like this one, so that you're not wading through piles of statistics and that kind of thing. We try to get right to the point and then back it up with data. So hopefully that's useful to you.
Just wanted to still unpack that same deal. Again, so many other great resources also putting, again, adults in this capacity building space around their own self-reflection on their practice. I think, again, Monique, you probably have done some of those sessions there, right? Again, of getting us practitioners at every level, from the community practitioner level, again, as we really think about whole child, of really impacting them across all the learning settings and ecologies. I don't know if you want to maybe come back on and talk about some of those trainings that have happened, that you did all summer, really helping build the capacity or be a response to that key data point that, again, we need adult learning and development across, not only because of what those data told us, but obviously because it's still a pressing issue.
And I'm always surprised how often just the providers need that time to process themselves. How many sessions end in tears with people who have not paid close attention to those things and those harms, and have done that in session, the ability to reflect on those things and think deeply about how that really has impacted them. I can't say enough that as adults, we have to work on in entering those practices into our lives, or even outside of our jobs. How are we doing that at home, and really centering that so we can show up in those buildings knowing that folks have experienced these traumas in way different ways than ourselves. How can we continue to show up and be a supportive system and be able to hear what trauma may produce, which could be flying off the handle, which could be unpredictable, which could be people harming themselves. So like really centering ourselves and thinking deeply about how we feel and what's going on in our bodies is just as important for social emotional learning and for healing centered practices around schools and just in communities.
Interesting, again, because we both have done trainings and we do them again, or we still convene behavioral health teams, different folks who are coordinating, even those who are using the MTSS moniker, of coordinated approaches, is very much so. Again, this is also taking a hit that we can't do this in person. Those used to be roll up your sleeves, bring out the data, in-person sessions. And so this idea, I don't know, so maybe also how's that the adult capacity building, has that look like virtually? And I would open that to everyone, as we had to try to both respond to that data point of building adult capacity, but also shifting to squeezing it in, with all of the different demands and changes that have happened in the community and in schools. On top of that, it's also been virtual. I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about what that has looked like.
Like practice those mitigating practices. For example, like WooClap is free, it's democratic, it's very transparent. There's just all different ways to collect information, collect feedback from communities. Flipgrid is one of my personal favorites, which is like a K-12 Blackboard. Not only can you bring in materials for young people, but you also can create space for talking, sharing stories, showing up, because you can record yourself on that platform. We use Padlet a lot to allow people to give feedback that's honest, but also can do it anonymously. And that's really important for people to feel safe and feel like they can give feedback. And we want feedback. We want to hear what's working, what's not working for different communities. But being able to do that in a safe space where people feel like they're not going to be targeted afterwards if they have something, some critical feedback. And I think one of the things that we like to use a lot, of course, is Zoom. I know everyone's using Zoom. The ideas of using breakout rooms gives us an opportunity to bring in music. It really gives us a platform for folks to get more comfortable. But one of the things I would say and repeat as much as I can is one of the biggest things that I've tried to do is slow down. Not so much material, not so much information. We all are taking a lot of stuff in very fast. And so we want to give opportunities where we're slowing down. Community schools in general, before the pandemic, I think that was part of our role, is to slow down and interrupt slightly. And I think we need to do that as a whole community more. And so how can we give teachers and administrators strategies and support their strategies around slowing down and giving people space? How are we making sure those break rooms for teachers are spaces where they can just woosah and really just relax and cater to their senses in those spaces? I think we have to be very innovative in our approach. I think we have to, here's an opportunity for us to really think deeply and differently. And then last but not least, anything we can do to gather the voices, the hearts and minds of our community, the better. And when I say community, I mean young people, parents, and staff. Like, we're all in this together. And so we have to think about all as we do this work, and to ensure that we are signaling that we are healers and that we are here in partnership. And so I think sometimes that's different. That feels different for some people. But that's why I really would encourage you to think about looking at those community-based partners who may be doing that similar work and welcome them into the school to be a supportive structure.
Thank you both for sharing. And I know for the ELA team, we continue to share resources to be as helpful as possible regarding building up that emotional capacity, whether that be managing emotion of students, but also for the adults, school admin, teachers themselves. Some of our partner organizations, of course, including AIR, are developing those resources continuously. So definitely stay tuned for more. As we kind of wrap up, we wanted to provide you all with more information of where to follow up. So in regards to AIR and their national surveys, you can follow along with the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag AIR COVID survey. They're also on Facebook, American Institutes for Research, and of course on their website, where you can sign up for their newsletter, which is air.org. And then for the ELA team, similarly, you can find us on Twitter at educateall_org. On Facebook, we have our Facebook group where you can find new resources. And at our website, educatingalllearners.org, you'll find these recordings, other events we have, and our resource library, which we've linked to in the slides. So I wanted to thank again all of you for tuning in, and thank you again to our presenters for sharing some of that research and perspectives for people as we continue this school year. But that's it for our session today, so I hope you have a great remainder of your day. Thanks, everyone.